So it's time to start reassembling this. Okay, so we've got the brake line started in the back of that wheel cylinder. We've got the 2 bolts in the back. We just got to tighten them up. Another spot, we put a little bit of grease. This is the star wheel that's used for the automatic brake adjuster. A little bit on that end and some on the threads. So on that first end there's a cap that sits on there, and it needs to be free moving so that when it's in the brake shoe, that star wheel can turn for its adjustment. The other end threads on, but again it'll be stationary in the brake shoe, so that star wheel has to be able to turn freely in those threads, and they like to rust up and seize on you, so a little bit of grease inside of them on the threads will help. Push pins for our master cylinder that they just sit inside the rubber, the dust boot there, and the top of our brake shoes will go into the slotted end of those. So that'll be what actually pushes the brake shoes in and out, or out rather. The springs pull everything back in. There's a groove. The shaft that comes through there, or the little pin that comes through the shoe, has a groove in it for that lock clip. So we're just trying to make sure we're in the groove. And then we'll pinch the end of it shut. So that'll hold that arm in place. Now this pin, it just looks basically like a nail with a special head on it. There's a hole in the backing plate, one on each side, that those pins will come through. So there's the one on that side. There's another one on this side. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky with getting all the pieces to sit where they're supposed to be. So there's the end of that pin sticking out. Now, it kind of looks like an arrow, the shape of the end. I make sure it's straight up and down, and I just find this the easiest way. There's a couple of caps for this spring. So there's what one of the caps look like. They both look the same, and they have a slot through that end that's kind of bubbled out there. If I turn it over, it's recessed in on this side. So your bottom one, the cap is going to go like this, so that the raised portion will go inside that spring. And then the other cap on that end will sit in so that that raised portion again is inside the spring. So we'll put that on. And because I'm holding that pin on the back side with one of my fingers to hold it in place, but I know that that pin, the arrow portion of it, is straight up and down. So when I put this spring here, I want to make sure that the slot in the cap is straight up and down. Try and hold it all in place. You're going to get a pair of pliers, grip the cap, push it on over the pin, and do a half turn. So there, that locks that in. That's what holds that shoe on. I try and get the light in. You can see how. See how that pin is crossways to the slot in the end of that cap. So that's all we're doing for putting those back into position. This little clip here, it's got a groove on the back side. That'll be for that adjusting cable. When it's in place, that cable will run around the back in that groove. There's a hole that's punched through it, and it's raised on the back side. That'll sit in a hole on the brake shoe. Okay, so I'll put the cable on over that pin. So that end of the spring goes through that metal plate we just put on that is guiding that cable. And I said there is a tool you can buy for this, but I've always found it just as easy using a screwdriver. So the cable, everything's still in place there. There, those springs are in place. Now for the bottom, it's a little bit trickier. We have this bracket, this hole, the other end of the cable is going to go in here, and so is a spring on the bottom. So this acts as a pivot. When you step on the brakes in reverse, the top of this shoe will pull on the brake drum, which will pull the cable. That pulls this in this direction. The star wheel will sit in here like this, and as it returns, it turns the wheel one tooth, so it adjusts the brakes. And that cable is what was just laying in here the way it is now. It wasn't attached to that, so that's why this one had never been adjusting. This area can be a little bit tricky getting everything put together, putting that last spring in place. There's our adjusting wheel is in, our bracket is in, our cable is hooked up to it this time. Okay, that's a long stretch. You've got to stretch this spring a fair bit. So try and get a pair of vice grips clamped on that spring as tight as you can, back away from the end so that there's nothing interfering with the hook end. Ouch. When you try and hook it on that bracket, and the bracket is, so it wants to move around, the spring is really all that holds it in place. So this one sometimes is a little tricky to get it in there. There. That went pretty well. Okay. So we're even. All of our springs are in the correct order. Nothing is binding. Everything looks good. So these are the old brake pads that had all that brake fluid soaked into them. The only reason I'm putting them back on is because I'm not sure if my sanding and stuff in that wheel cylinder is going to actually solve the leak. And I don't want to mess up the new ones. Okay, that is really loose. So we're going to turn our star wheel here, because I had that all apart, so it's way out of adjustment. So we'll bring that metal tab out of the way that does the adjusting of its own. We'll just bring it out of the way so it's not hitting that star wheel. And then you can turn it by hand. Now it is a reverse thread. Yeah, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry, it is a reverse thread. So the way you would normally thread a nut onto a bolt, this is the opposite direction, the thread's on this. And that is still very loose. What I'm looking for, or what I want to achieve, is I just want it a snug fit. I want that drum to be, I can feel it or hear it sliding over those shoes as I put it on. Okay, we've got a little bit of a snug fit there. So we're going to leave it where it is for the time being. So we definitely have air in the brake system now. So I'm going to have to bleed the brakes. I don't have a brake bleeder valve or pump. So it takes two people. I need somebody in the car to operate the brake pedal while I open and close the bleeder nipple on the back of this so that we can bleed the air out of the system. Okay, so we're getting ready to bleed the brakes. So this is our bleeder nipple that's up here. Our brake line's tightened up, our bolts are back in for the wheel cylinder. Now what I try to use is a plastic bottle and a piece of hose to fit on the end of this nipple. So you're not just spraying brake fluid out all over the place under here. Got my helper in the car. So what we're doing, I loosen the bleeder nipple and I have him push the brake pedal down to the floor, and then he holds it there, and I tighten the bleeder nipple up and he lets the brake pedal back up. So it's not sucking air back in through this bleeder nipple, that's drawing fluid back into the lines from the master cylinder. And when he gets to the top, I loosen this bleeder nipple again and go back down. Down. Let it up. back down. Up. Okay, so we're going to stop there. There was no air on that last stroke, and we're going to check our master cylinder. Make sure we're not running out of brake fluid already. This is a single reservoir master cylinder still on this car, so we need to bleed the lines from all 4 wheels to get all of the air out of the system. So we're going to continue on doing the other 3 wheels like this, and then we'll see if this thing has any leaks in it or if our repair job worked out. Okay, so we got our brakes all put back together. The wheel cylinder that we cleaned up, rebuilt, we put the old shoes on until we were sure it didn't have a leak. So we bled all the brakes. And while the car was still on the stands, we run it, let the wheels spin using the brakes and stuff to stop them. Shut everything off, checked, there was no fluid leaking, no signs of it leaking anywhere. Pulled the brake drum back off and everything was dry. So our repair job worked. We didn't have to buy a new cylinder in the end, we just had to clean up the one that we had. So everything's been reassembled and this brake job is finished. Thank you very much for watching.